I'm Eric Anderson. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, boosting public safety and building better streets. Two goals of a proposed $3 billion budget for the city of San Diego. Plus, keeping tabs on so-called problem landlords, the plan to stop owners who rent out substandard homes.
And what lessons can San Diego schools, students, and parents learn from the recent suicides of two transgender teens in North County? I'm Peggy Pico with that conversation. And home sales in San Diego County continue to climb, and so do prices. Are we headed for another housing bubble and a return to dangerous mortgage loans?
Targeting drug addiction at a homeless camp near the border, the challenges for nearby rehab centers, and what patients say about the treatment. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Dwayne Brown is off tonight. The City of San Diego's recreation centers will be open longer. Its streets will be better lit, and parks are getting an upgrade. Those are some of the improvements Mayor Kevin Faulconer proposed today when he unveiled his fiscal 2016 budget. KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento joins us from the newsroom with details. Taryn, what's the central theme of the mayor's proposed budget plan?
Well, at the budget unveiling today, Mayor Kevin Faulconer announced more funding for park improvements, after-school programs, and street and sidewalk repairs. He says his proposed 2016 budget emphasizes neighborhood services.
It expands and enhances services that matter to San Diego's families, and it follows up on last year's budget by continuing to restore cuts that occurred during the recession.
So that sort of begs the question, where's that extra money going to come from?
Well, the 2016 proposed budget is $3.2 billion. Now, that's up from the $3 billion 2015 budget. Those extra funds from increased revenue taxes will go toward the police department to boost officer compensation. The San Diego Fire Rescue Department will see extra money for more academies and a new fire station in Little Italy. And you can see more dollars going to parks and recreation to expand rec center hours and improve playgrounds. And there's also more money going toward the Transportation and Stormwater Department to upgrade water pipelines.
We know this is going to be a long process from an approved budget to an adopted budget, but what is the next step?
The mayor will present the budget to the city council tomorrow. During the beginning of May, the council will hold a series of public meetings to review each individual department's budget. The public is invited to attend. An evening meeting is scheduled for May 11th specifically for San Diegans to share their comments. The council will then take up a revised budget later next month. A new budget must be in place by July 1st.
KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento. Taryn, thanks. Derelict landlords should be aware because they're included in the new proposed city budget as well. And KPBS reporter Megan Burks tells us Mayor Faulconer wants to fund a team dedicated to rooting out problem landlords.
Mayor Faulconer wants to fund 4 new code enforcement officers. They would target neighborhoods where residents often deal with negligent landlords and substandard housing conditions. The budget line item comes after Faulconer told KPBS he would send a clear message to landlords who repeatedly violate state and municipal housing laws. He was responding to a KPBS and Voice of San Diego investigation. It detailed roach infestations, asthma-inducing mold, and gas leaks in several Barrio Logan and City Heights apartments owned by one landlord. Despite a lengthy history of tenant complaints, the city's code enforcement division said it lacked resources to investigate the landlord and detect widespread problems. The new enforcement plan would cost about $330,000 and must go through the budget review process. Final approval would come in June. Meanwhile, code enforcement officers are wrapping up training that will let them respond to tenant complaints about rodent and insect infestations. Tenants weren't getting much help with the problem. The city was referring those calls to the county, which says it doesn't have jurisdiction over properties in the city. A 2013 state law had clarified those rules. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
A cruise ship docked in San Diego today with nearly 100 sick passengers on board. They were ill from a suspected norovirus outbreak. Experts from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are investigating the outbreak on the Celebrity Infinity vessel. The ship left San Diego last month for a cruise to the Mexican Riviera. The online publication Maritime Executive says this marks the fourth outbreak of illness on a cruise ship this year. Immigrants' right advocates held signs and chanted health care for all as they marched on the state capitol today. They want lawmakers to approve a new Senate bill that expands health care to people who are living in the country illegally. If passed, it would offer Medi-Cal to more than 1 million people who are excluded from federal health care reforms. Conservative lawmakers are opposed. They argue the bill doesn't say how much it will cost taxpayers. Hundreds of people found living in a Tijuana River canal are now in rehabilitation centers. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero says the Tijuana mayor sent them to get treatment for drug addictions. And here's a warning. Some of the images in this story may be disturbing to some viewers.
Gracias.
Venus Saiza Cruz spent 6 years living in El Bordo, a homeless encampment in a canal along the Tijuana River. But last month, she and about 30 other women from El Bordo came to El Cirat, a women's rehab center.
Este es el dormitorio de las señoras enfermitas.
She says she came willingly, desperate for a comfortable place to sleep and eat.
In fact, I arrived very crazy.
She says her main reason for coming was to get her 9-month-old daughter back. Saiza gave birth to Juanita under a bridge.
She was like this small. I could hold her in my hand.
Her sister-in-law agreed to take care of the baby because Saiza could not. She was using heroin and methamphetamine. But Saiza plans to stop using drugs forever.
If my baby fought to live when she was born, why can't I? I mean, God brought us here for a reason.
Saiza is one of nearly 600 people the Mexican government removed last month from El Bordo, where they lived in makeshift homes. The mayor's office released this video of what they say was activity in El Bordo. The Municipal Anti-Addiction Institute says most of the riverbed residents were committing crimes to feed their addictions, and that their presence was hurting tourism and other businesses. Over the winter, the government recruited hundreds to go to 12 rehab centers around Tijuana. Then in March, heavy rains and flooding led the mayor to order the removal of everyone living in the canal, sending them to the centers. El Bordo is now empty of residents. Local police and military drive back and forth, making sure no one returns. Government officials hope visitors will now feel safer when they cross the border on bridges over the canal. The federal government is helping the city of Tijuana with funding and personnel from Mexico City. 3 mobile hospitals with medical and dental experts visit 3 centers a week. More are expected soon. They check patients for tuberculosis, HIV, hepatitis C, and other health problems. Saiza was anemic and so malnourished when she arrived she couldn't walk by herself.
My voice still trembles.
They also fill in cavities and give them toothbrushes to clean their teeth, often rotted due to drug use. Mexican lawyers say all of this operates in a legal gray area. The federal Mexican law regulating treatment of drug addiction says patients' stay at a rehab center must be strictly voluntary. Officials admit many of El Bordo residents didn't want help.
Generally, any drug user will reject help. They'll never accept they need help.
Even some of those who wanted to get treatment were desperate to leave when they started having withdrawal symptoms. Ricardo Lugo volunteered to come to the rehab center El Mesón from El Bordo. But going cold turkey off heroin and methamphetamine almost changed his mind.
When you arrive here, you're like, I want to leave, get me out of here. But it's a process.
Lugo lived in California for 14 years before he was deported for a DUI.
Above all, I couldn't accept being separated from my family, so I started drugging myself.
Now that his body has detoxified, he wants to stay in rehab as long as he can. He says the center keeps his mind busy and off of drugs. Patients help with the cleaning, exercise, read, learn new crafts, and more. Still, global health experts are concerned about the quality and humaneness of treatment at Tijuana rehab centers. Stephanie Strathy at the Global Health Initiative says most Tijuana centers lack methadone, an opioid that can be expensive but is used to wean people off of heroin safely.
Whether you can force people to enter drug treatment and then not provide them with methadone, which has been shown to be the only effective treatment for heroin addiction, that to me is an open question.
She says if patients relapse after abstaining from heroin without opioid substitution therapy, there's a high risk of overdose. Neither Luga nor Siza have received methadone at their respective centers.
Compulsory drug detention centers have actually not been shown anywhere to be effective, and that's why the United Nations called for their closing in 2012.
The government plans up to 6 months of integrative treatment and says it will ensure that patients don't relapse. Officials plan to help patients return to their Mexican cities of origin after they recover. But some haven't seen those cities since they were infants and don't know anyone there. Many were born in rural areas without the tools to deal with mental health or drug addiction problems. And even with government help, Tijuana doesn't have the infrastructure either. Oscar Torres is the director of a migrant shelter in Tijuana that offered free food and other services to many in El Bordo.
45% of deportees we attend to learned to drug themselves in Tijuana once they were deported.
Torres says the government's decision to put El Bordo residents in rehab was a significant step forward, but he's worried about what will happen to those people once they're released.
The question is, and afterward, if they don't have a place to go, a social platform to receive them, surely they're going to go back to the same situation.
He says his shelter can't help them all. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
Katie Shulov helped put together that report. It's part of a continuing series about mental health treatment in Tijuana. Reporting by the Fronteras Desk is made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Home prices in San Diego County are way up while mortgage rates are at historic lows. Peggy Pico asks if this housing boom will turn out better than the last.
The county's rising housing prices look eerily similar to sale prices 7 years ago, just before the Great Recession's real estate meltdown. But this time around, home inventory is lower throughout the county. Here with an update on local real estate markets and expectations are my guest, Michael Lee, finance lecturer at San Diego State University, and Chris Anderson, board president of San Diego Association of Realtors. And Chris, let's start with this. What's the median price of a single family home today in San Diego?
About $519,000.
So medium in between. Are housing prices here escalating, Chris, too quickly?
I don't believe so. The stats that you're going off of are looking month over month, but when you take it over a full year to look at it, it's not that great of an increase.
We're looking at percentage-wise, maybe 4% in there.
Right.
That's about right, what
Correct.
I thought I read. Michael, should we be worried about this 4% rising cost when we've got some limited inventory?
I don't believe so. I don't think we see the speculative factors that were behind the big run-up in house prices prior to the recession. And what we had is a catch-up period where we did have double-digit increases, a lot of that driven by some of the short sales and what have you. Now I think we're in a more sustainable environment for house price increases.
I understand that average mortgage rates are at historic lows. I've heard it been called that. What are they today?
I think you can get a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage for about 3.65%, roughly.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's a lot different than before. I know the Federal Reserve recently signaled that it's not going to raise short-term rates. Let me start with you, Michael. How do mortgage rates actually impact home prices?
With lower mortgage rates, you can afford to buy more house, or you can afford to be qualified for the house that you would like to purchase. So that's going to be a factor that'll boost demand.
And are you seeing that, Chris? Are you seeing people maybe qualify for a little bit bigger home than they could have a few years ago?
Yes. Plus, with the increase that we've had in appreciation, the people that were just breaking even are now making a profit, so they can move up. They have more of a buying power. They can get something better, newer, and then it frees up the inventory for the first-time buyer and fuels the market.
So condo people moving to single-family homes and other people moving up. Chris, recently Realtor.com found San Diego to be the least affordable place in the United States, mostly because of the inaffordability of buying a home. Wages here remain pretty much stagnant over the last 7 years, which a lot of people say this is the reason for part of the dangerous for questionable lending programs that were partly responsible for this big market crash back in the Great Recession. Are there any new safeguards in place to make sure this doesn't happen again when it comes to questionable mortgage loans?
There are definitely new safeguards. We really aren't seeing the self-certification and liar's loan type of limited documentation mortgages anymore. I think a lot of the same incentives, though, still exist in the market. Lenders need to get loan volume. People get paid on commission. So we haven't fixed everything, but we certainly have improved it.
Do you, either of you know the answer to this? Who enforces the housing lending programs? Do you know who does that? So if there's a questionable loan or mortgage loan, who would enforce that?
Well, it depends on the regulator. So the banking regulators would do that for banks and credit unions, and then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are de facto the biggest regulators in the market, and the FHA, and they would all kind of enforce whether their guidelines are being followed.
I see. And Chris, homes and condos typically sell well in the spring and summer.
Yes.
How do you expect to see sale prices climb throughout the year, either spring, summer, and then ultimately back in the fall?
Over the full year, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I see happening is probably in the mid single digits. So you're probably looking at about 5, 6, maybe 7% over the full year.
Over the full year,
yes.
But a little bit higher in the spring and summer?
Always. Always.
Right.
That is the time to buy and sell.
Okay. Chris Anderson, Michael Lee, thanks so much for the update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
San Diego State University students are taking a stand against sexual violence on campus, the sensitive subject, the focus of a week-long event at SDSU. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler talked to organizers who call awareness a first step.
I think awareness is the beginning, because I think sexual violence is a silent demon.
That's Tanisha Scorza. She's an undergrad and one of the student organizers for the first ever San Diego State Take Back the Week. It used to be a one-night event called Take Back the Night, but SDSU's Title IX coordinator Jessica Rento says students thought they could do more.
They put this all together, and we're so excited to support them as we roll out the programming for the campus.
Having a conversation about sexual violence can be difficult, but Scorza says it's a conversation students need to have.
Is having constant conversations and having conversations with the community and getting their opinion on what they feel is victim shaming and what is productive education.
The university wants students to have as many conversations about sexual violence as possible.
We're trying to engage our students as much as we can on this topic, because ignoring the problem isn't going to help solve it.
For a complete list of this week's sexual violence awareness events, go to kpbs.org. Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
2 transgender teens recently committed suicide in San Diego County, and that prompted Peggy Pico to take a closer look at the challenges that teens face and what's being done to help.
Before she died by suicide on April 2nd, Taylor Alessania, a 16-year-old student at Fallbrook High School, said she continued to be bullied about her transgender identity after she told school staff. Another North County transgender teen named Sage killed himself in March. Joining me with insight into the struggles of transgender teens and ways to help are my guests, Kurt Cunningham, Outreach Coordinator for Mental Health America's San Diego County chapter, and Vanjie Akeridge, an educational psychologist who works with LGBTQ teens. Vanjie, Taylor talked about sitting alone every day at lunch, wearing earphones, walking between classes so she wouldn't hear this bullying or name calling. How do schools deal with, or how should they deal with, a biased bullying?
It's important for schools to create a climate and a culture that is accepting and has unconditional positive regard for all students. So it is directed at the lead of the administrators to make sure that that climate is emotionally safe for all.
And Kurt, is there anything that schools have in place now to deal with this?
Well, schools in San Diego County have the Safe Schools Act. Unfortunately, it's not quite reaching its goal yet. It's been in place for about 4 years, and people are working at getting this implemented, but it's not quite reaching its goal.
So there's something in place, but clearly it's not all the way developed yet, or at least working yet. Vanjie, what specific challenges do transgender teens face?
Well, I think the anxiety and depression that comes from them looking in the mirror and not being comfortable with the person that they see in the mirror, and having a very different image of themselves and not being clear if and when that image in their mind will, match what they see in the mirror.
Mm-hmm. Kurt, your outreach, I understand, included an instructional lecture called LGBTQ 101. What did you discuss in that, and who attended that discussion?
That discussion was created for the psychiatric hospital, doctors, social workers, nurses, myself, and one of my advisory committee members, Liat Wexler, created this presentation and co-facilitated the presentation at the hospital. The hospital approached me because they needed more information, sensitivity training, because they were seeing an increase in transgender patients. So I've developed this training along with Liat to present at schools, other mental health facilities, medical facilities, anywhere that needs it. We can tailor it to their needs as well.
And Vanjie, how do you properly address somebody who is transgender, and why is it important to identify the person appropriately?
I think it's important to have a conversation with the person who identifies as transgender, what their preference is, because the last thing you want to do is dismiss who they are as an individual by not adhering to their preferred name and pronoun.
How are other LGBT and Q teens that you work with, how are they coping with these 2 deaths in their neighborhoods here?
Well, I think the LGBTQ community at large throughout our county is struggling significantly. Any loss of life, I think, is a challenge, and is something that we all struggle with, both those directly identifying with the LGBT community and those professionals like myself who support the community.
And Kurt, what is out there for, specifically, let's talk teens in schools?
Teens in schools, we have the Trevor Project. They have a lifeline, they have text, Trevor Chat. There are resources for teens, for adults, transgender teens, transgender adults have the translifeline.org. It's a website, and there's a crisis line there that they can reach. It's a transgender driven, transgender staffed, so these people can relate to the issues that they're calling about.
And Vanjie, how would you like to see people, parents, friends, help support somebody who is transgender?
I think it's important for, folks to ask the right questions and to inquire about how that individual is feeling. What we don't know can definitely be detrimental to that person's life and overall existence. So it's important to be informed.
And Kurt, what would you say here if somebody who is a transgender teen says, listen, I'm struggling, I need some help? What's the first step?
The first step is to get them the help. Sometimes people dismiss it as a cry for attention, but if someone's crying for attention, what's wrong with giving them the attention they need?
So where do you take them? Where do they go?
If they're in school, they seek out a counselor, principal, teacher. If they're at home, you find the resource like the transgender translifeline.org or 911 in some cases.
All right. We are out of time, unfortunately. Vanjie Akridge and Kurt Cunningham, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, the race for the White House heats up with Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio jumping into the ring. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
There is a changing of the guard in the Arabian Gulf as a San Diego aircraft carrier prepares to sail home. Today, the USS Carl Vinson turned over command of operations to the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The Vinson left San Diego last August to join the battle against the Islamic State. While it's not clear when the ship is coming back to San Diego, Captain Carl Thomas said in a Facebook post, it will be nice to set the compass point in one direction. A Coast Guard helicopter picked up an unusual payload today near the Point Loma Lighthouse. Scientists were collecting the bones of a humpback whale that washed ashore back in February. Researchers at the Natural History Museum have been preparing the carcass for weeks. but they had to call in the Coast Guard to help move the animal's skull off the rocks. The Jayhawk helicopter made several passes before hovering and then lifting the 300-pound massive bone. Officer Marvin Gates called the operation unusual but routine.
We do a lot of sling load operations or external loads. Typically, we do a lot of training down at Imperial Beach. So this is a great opportunity for us to actually come and do some training with a real-time load that's in an area that we don't typically do the training.
Humpback whales can weigh 30 to 50 tons, and they can get to be 50 feet long. This animal had been decomposing for weeks, and it was finally time to lift the bones up the cliff. Scott Tremor is a mammologist at the San Diego Natural History Museum. He says the bones are heavy and bulky.
The next step from here is after we get it in our vehicles, we're going to move it to a site back in the mountains where we're going to bury it. And that's where the domestic beetles, the naturally occurring domestic beetles, will end up eating that flesh, that decaying flesh.
Once the beetles are done, Tremor says it'll get a soak in a bacteria-rich bath. That should clean the bones enough for researchers to begin examining the skeleton. Tremor says it's also possible the bones will end up on display at the Natural History Museum. The weather's going to be warming up in the San Diego region. We're looking at the possibility of sunny skies by the coast, temperatures in the mid to upper 70s. Even warmer in the inland valleys. Look for temperatures there in the 70s and 80s. Up in the mountain regions, it's going to be sunny, of course. Temperatures in the 60s, and it's going to be hot in the desert. Temperatures there in the 90s and 80s. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back here again tomorrow night. Have a great evening.